My face is totally hamburger with exploded bloody eyes and no lips, and the back of my head is open from a disgusting impact. I'm weeping and have even pissed myself a little. I see a beer in front of me and grab it greedily, pouring the whole thing down my throat in 5 seconds, except that a large portion runs out a hole in my throat and soaks my collar and chest. Mind you, this wasn't out of my mouth. I actually sensed it swallow and then flow out of my trachea onto my shirt. I am a visionary painter with an emphasis on capturing the subtle sacredness and mystery of life, as enhanced by the entheogenic and psychedelic experiences. I fully credit the development of my consciousness, my art, my values, and all things and ideas, from religious to political, to the sacramental and casual use of various power plants and psychedelic substances. I have dosed LSD in varying forms and amounts at least 200 to 300 times in my life, and quite possibly more, many times having large administrations of 700 to 2,000 micrograms at a sitting. I have eaten peyote and San Pedro, drank ayahuasca from Peru, grown and smoked vast quantities of ganja, cultivated and gathered at least 5 species of psychedelic mushrooms, including cyanescens and azurescens, eaten Hawaiian woodrose seeds, Jimson seeds, morning glory seeds, grown and extracted my own dimethyltryptamine from mimosa desmodium root bark, had nitrous, ecstasy, synthetic mescaline pills, and various designer dance drugs such as 2CP and GHB in large doses. I have even smoked opium many times. Needless to say, I believe myself to be, or have been, a professional entheogenic psychonaut. I have seen what I thought was every form of illusion, alteration, color enhancement, psychic and religious reorganization theme that I can imagine. I have become paper or ash or grass or dirt many times, watched my body dissolve and turn into something else, and even seen and conversed with angels, energy beings, aliens of various races and fairies. I have blasted off into space and become a merman. I have been chased by greys, typical alien forms, through the woods at night. I have met Jesus and Buddha and the devil and been assured that they were all the same thing as me. I have a very distorted, advanced way of perceiving energy. I have developed latent psychic ability, and I think I've even experienced telekinesis, remote viewing, astral travel, and advanced dream work from my ingestion of these different substances. I fully believe that eventually I will learn how to fly or levitate while awake. So my point is that I have a large amount of experience, but I am not usually that disclosing about it. I don't consider myself an expert, but I am not afraid of what may lie behind the doors of perception. I don't think I'm invulnerable to experience, and I try to remain open, compassionate, and ready for the clues and signs that I am to receive. In short, if asked to ingest any psychotropic, hallucinogenic, or consciousness-altering natural substance, I consider it an invitation to expand from my guides, and am usually eager to embark. My testimony this time is way different. Never in my wildest ideas could I have conjured an experience as volatile, frightening, out of control, and spatial. I was hanging out with my friend Corey, whom I had just met after he fixed my water tank, sharing a couple of well-deserved after-work beers on my porch in Kealakekua, Hawaii. Corey has a personality that definitely tends toward the esoteric and stoner, so I was surprised when he told me he couldn't smoke cannabis anymore, that it produced uncontrollable paranoia and delusion in him, something that he related had developed after enjoying regular use of the sacrament for years previous. I was smoking a bowl of some high-grade cannabis sativa that I had grown and had consumed 2 12-ounce bottles of pale ale. Our discussion turned to the use of other medicines, and I revealed some of my experience. He expressed curiosity and a little fear about psilocybin and LSD, telling me he'd never experienced either one. He told me he was afraid of being in another visual world for such a duration of time. I assured him that it wasn't as disconcerting as all that, and was usually accompanied by such a powerful and pleasant body high that it was possible to stay grounded and meditate through the experience. He seemed interested, and maybe a little impressed that I was able to offer insight into such a topic. Being a pleasant evening, we continued our discussion and talked about coca and yage and ayahuasca and peyote, extolling the virtues and dangers of each. I shared the scant experience I had with some of these medicines. Being the thorough guys we were, We kept talking for maybe an hour and really built trust and connection in a short time span. I was very stoned and a little buzzed, and our talk seemed imbued with import and like one of those things that is meant to happen. The next thing I know, Corey asks me quietly, "Hey bro, ever tried Salvia Divinorum, divine as sage?" I told him I'd smoked it on one occasion and found the effects to be somewhat lucid and euphoric yet subtle. I had known a friend several years previous who had cultivated a large bush of the stuff from a cutting he'd ordered from a company in Sebastopol, California. We had harvested and dried several leaves, did a little research on the Mazatecs and their process, read a few things, and then determined that the best way to proceed would be to load as large a bowl possible in a water pipe and circle breathe it repetitively into our lungs until we felt some effect. Upon taking my turn, I had a pleasant, visual short-term high in which my senses were greatly enhanced. I became aware of the solidity of empty space and saw vessels of air as if they were glass pockets, and for a brief moment relaxed on a beach far away in another world under double moons. As the effect faded, I was left with the thought that my other self had a fishtail instead of legs. It was a clear visual memory that I hold to this day. When Corey asked me if I'd like to try, I was a little taken aback, but curious. As I said, I felt a sense of import and decided to proceed. I was in a comfortable place, my own home, had plenty of good music, low lighting, and a nice cozy buzz, and was with my new friend. I figured on something like before, but I was dead wrong. Dead wrong. Corey ran out to his truck and returned with a small blue glass vial with a screw-on lid, the kind for containing oils and essences. He let me hold it, and the outside of the glass felt oily, and I had the sensation in my teeth that whatever liquid it contained was powerful. I was also surprised because I'd been expecting to see some dried leaves or plant matter of some kind. I asked him about this, and he told me that this was actually a salvia extract or distillation made in the normal manner of processing herbs, and that it was a 60x concentration. He told me it was definitely powerful and active, but like salvia in general, short-lived. I asked him how we would smoke a liquid if it was in the same manner as a hash oil, say on top of ganja, or maybe in a freebase pipe. He looked at me strangely and handed the bottle to me again. "It's not liquid, look again," he told me. I took a closer look and saw that the vial actually contained what looked like innocuous bits of greenish papery substance, not unlike green fish food flakes. Corey explained to me that the makers of this particular extract would distill pounds of the herb into a 60x concentration, and then soak raw dried leaves in the extract, and then dehydrate and crush those leaves for the finished product. I was completely taken aback. It had been nearly 10 years since I'd heard of the stuff, and I had no idea such complicated and pure extracts were being offered. I have a basic understanding of making extracts and infusions of plants into hydrosols and oils, so I understood the whole 60x thing. Corey next took a small glass pipe from a cloth that was used exclusively for smoking the salvia. He carefully poured what looked like 1/3 to a half of a gram of the dried matter into the small bowl. He looked at me in the dim light and asked me if I'd like to go first. He offered to go first, but then recanted and said I seemed ready. I was a little nervous and asked him what I could expect. He looked at me strangely and said, "It's different for everyone, I don't know. You did all that acid and stuff. Probably like that." As I explained, I'm not a novice, so I prepared my set and setting as best as I could, selecting some mellow roots reggae music and lighting some incense. I next closed my eyes with the bowl in my hand and prayed to Mother Aina, Earth, and the Indians who grew the medicine for guidance and counsel. I asked with my intention to be shown the next phase of my development, smiled at Corey, lifted the bowl to my lips, lit it, and began to inhale. The smoke was not as acrid as I remembered, and I was able to take a great deep draw. It burned readily, and the vapours expanded in my chest in the first second or two. So for the record, I'm seriously starting to lose it a little bit as I recount this experience. It's been 3 days, and I'm still not completely right, but let me not digress. I believe telling this story may help me. As I held in the drawer, I experienced a familiar clacking in my ears that sounded like a rattlesnake and a water drum. I've heard it many times when using DMT or LSD. The next thing I experienced was hearing Corey tell me, "Hold it in as long as you can, longer than a ganja draw." I glance at him and he seems to be leering at me like he's waiting for something to happen. I close my eyes and try to breathe the smoke out, but I realize I can hold my breath indefinitely and don't even need to exhale. As I squeeze my eyes shut, I see something like an engine, made of a Mobius strip or infinity symbols consisting of particles of light in 2 or 3 phases, laying one atop the other, each rotating in different directions. I have just enough time to think to myself, "My, that's pretty," and then I exhale. As I exhale the smoke, time stretches, and I see the vapor peel away from me in a tunnel of rotating color. This all happened, I would guess, within the count of 3, so even though describing it in detail takes effort, there was no substance or time in the experience to really appreciate it. At that point, something terrible happened, something so disconcerting and frightening that I am beside myself with paranoia and fear that it may occur again without warning. Instantly, without any warning or change in my position, without any preparation whatsoever, my entire being exploded into a fragment of forces. There was no more me. There was no room, no existence, no identity, no island, no planet, no values, no opinions, no power, just titanic, grinding, terribly painful forces that trembled through my body and tore me to physical pieces. I watched in horror as all of my body fluids splashed onto some surface, and my organs went catapulting away from me. My fingers and toes stretched for miles to various points of infinity, which were overlaid and constructed of rainbow eyes and toothy smiles and distorted, wizened faces, all leering at me and teasing me. I was completely upended, in utter annihilating vertigo, with no container to hold my energy. As my being flowed out and into many parallel worlds, I will tell you plainly, this was not a pleasant experience. I was utterly in pain and terrified. I felt abandoned, distant, trapped, kidnapped, raped, let down, and utterly imprisoned forever by this group of leering faces that surrounded my perception. As it continued, there was a terrible rushing of water and a huge pressure in my middle. All of this is very strange, because while I experienced all this pushing and pulling and distortion, it was mostly in the light realm, for my physical being had ceased to exist. I was so terrified I didn't know what to do. The colours and sensations that surrounded me were gnashing, violent and ripping. My mind was in a terrible clutch, and I was sure I had been kidnapped by some alien race for their experiments, and that they had trapped my mind in a jar or an energy prison, and then desiccated and cut up my mortal remains in front of me. I just knew Corey had been sent by them, or the government, or some kind of drug assassin or agent to bend me into a place of total submission. I had no power, no senses, no sight, no physical body, no home, no music, no furniture, absolutely everything about my values, ideas about God, religion, and my history had all been violently ended and eliminated in 1 second. I was completely paralyzed and utterly helpless. As I took this all in, I realized that I was surrounded by several voices who were all having great fun at my expense, and not only leering, but teasing me for my discomfort, and then being patronizing and falsely comforting. These voices sounded way distorted and distant, yet clear, and they had the quality of what I can best describe as a lounge singer or a radio DJ. I think I make that association because they were attempting to be warm and familiar even though they were cold and alien. They kept saying, "Hey buddy, how's it going buddy? How you doing now buddy? Oh you stuck buddy? How'd that happen dude? Hey, it's cool. Just breathe buddy. Hey there buddy." And then they would repeat like that in different keys and tempos in time, with the grinding oscillations of light which surrounded me until I thought I would shriek in agony at them. About that point, I began to have waves of sobbing and grief wash over me as I realized I had done some utterly stupid thing and would never live to see my son again. I experienced him becoming a man without his father and having to live with the stigma that I had mysteriously disappeared, presumed killed. As this thought occurred to me, I realized I had to fight whatever was happening if I could. This new idea gave me energy, and as I thought about it, I screamed out to myself, apparently at the top of my lungs, "I will not accept this," and pushed my hand down hard onto my glass coffee table, snapping the top in 2. At that point, I screamed out, "Table!" and it popped into view, except spinning and upside down. I struggled to wrestle the coffee table off the ceiling and then screamed out, "Floor!" As I did, the floor spun into view, and the pattern in the carpet resolved out of all the energy surrounding me. I was slowly coming into some form then, and realized I could make a new body from all the cosmic goo which surrounded me. I screamed arm, then feet, and watched as nimble, strangely thin limbs popped into view. At that point, the voices really started mocking me. This is what they said in harmony with Casey Kasem voices. "Oh, poor baby. Baby needs a body. What? I thought you knew, baby. There is no body. There is no you. I am we, remember. You read all about it, baby. Ooh, poor baby. Baby needs a hand. Baby needs a foot too. What a poor baby. You're not very good at this, dude. Poor baby." And again, over and over ad nauseum in different pitches and escalating chunks of broken tones like crickets, cascading waves of sound and inquiry and patronizing pity. I was enraged at their indifference and determined to walk out of their prison, so I screamed, "Yes, I need my body," and began to stomp away from their leering circle. By the way, what I screamed has been extrapolated and paraphrased somewhat through a combination of my own memory and Corey's testimony. As I stomped away, each footfall became slightly more solid, and I was treated to a horrific sight. I was lurching along on stubs, dragging my own entrails in my arms, struggling mightily like walking in a pool. As I tried to look around the room, my eye sockets burst into blood, popping out the lenses of my glasses, which glittered and fell into the abyss below my feet as the frames melted off my face. At this point, I was popping in and out of my body, and treated to alternate flashes of grinding hollow fountain and drain prison of light prisms, or my rotting, broken corpse dissolving and falling apart like oversteamed meat. The next thing I know, I find myself standing weaving back and forth, breathing with great effort, as tons and tons of filaments or fibers of light are streaming off my body like rainbow fur. I can barely see and barely breathe, but I am conscious, somewhat, of a physical room. Next, I see Corey sitting in his chair, looking at me slack-jawed. I know that he is the agent who tried to destroy me, and he is in for it. I rush through the sands of resistance, pick him up bodily out of his chair, push him back up against the railing of the porch, and scream at him at the very top of my lungs in an undulating shriek. "What the fuck, man? What the fuck did you give me, you fucking asshole?" Over and over like glossolalia, or turrets, and shaking. I began to use one of my newfound arms to sock him in the face and neck over and over, accusing him in a scream of trying to imprison and kill me. Meanwhile, he's fending off my blows and hiding all the bottles. He's afraid I'm going to smash one over his head. He's telling me in a wildly distorted, drawn-out, echoey voice that resounds around me like timbal drums. "Yo, just salvia. Remember, man, you did it before. This is a little stronger, but just salvia, man, just salvia." Then his voice fractures like tittering glass, and I fall face down into one of the poles on my porch, smacking my nose hard enough to see stars. I began to scream that if and when the ride ends, I'm going to kill his dumbass, and I grab onto the pole with my arms and legs and scurry up it until I'm hugging it with all my might. As this is going on, the entire universe is flowing by like sand, and I'm being tossed on a turbulent sea of yawning titanic opposing forces, being buffeted and slammed by something large like the house is trying to shake me off. At that point, I pop back out and see my pitiful body clinging to the railing. My face is totally hamburger with exploded bloody eyes and no lips, and the back of my head is open from a disgusting impact. I'm weeping and have even pissed myself a little. Then boom, I'm back in my body again with its luminous skin and coloured hair. Then out, then in, and out again, and in. I beg for someone to help me, screaming for anyone at the top of my lungs to please come and help me. I'm being killed. He's got me. Help me. Right about then, Corey comes up and looks at me. He asks me if I'm feeling better, and I bite my lip so hard it's fat the next day and shake my head. I'm seconds away from screaming, and I beg him to hug me and take me inside, which he does. Next, I find myself dissolving and becoming solid in waves as I step onto the couch. Each step is like molten lead, and I'm relieved to sit down. I see a beer in front of me and grab it greedily, pouring the whole thing down my throat in 5 seconds, except that a large portion runs out a hole in my throat and soaks my collar and chest. Mind you, this wasn't out of my mouth. I actually sensed it swallow and then flow out of my trachea onto my shirt. I am shaking and mortally frightened, and keep lapsing into pacing, scurrying and weeping fits for over 2 hours, stammering and gibbering like a lunatic, and turning on every light in the house. I am full of energy and accusations at Corey, and I seek to investigate his import and why he came to get me. For over 3 hours, my vision has been so horribly distorted that all solid matter seems to ooze out of the sea of math from which I have just emerged. I keep going in circles of babbling terror and stretch my brow and forehead with my fingers, probe at my eyeballs painfully, and tear deep scratches in my elbows and ankles as I'm trying to pull off the rainbow fluff that coats my body. I guess a little after that, my next-door neighbour came over, armed and ready to beat the shit out of whoever was cutting my legs off, but I don't really recall his visit. Of course, I failed to sleep at all that evening, laying awake and conversing with dead relatives, myself and distant family, and finally, after a long, restless night, I worked up the courage to Google what I'd just smoked. It is now 72 hours later and I am still barely here. I feel like a ghost, like some important part of me was left missing. I have no values anymore and see no distinction between any energies, other than how they fit into the fountain and drain construct. Driving a car, seeing at night, paranoia, continuous whispering in my head. If it continues for another day or two, I might have had a psychic break. I remain deeply frightened and deeply impaired by this experience. Food has become innocuous and seemingly unnecessary. All matter has become what it is, loosely bound quantum shit that blinks in and out at will. All of my deepest fears, woes, and ideations about the valueless and unconstrained nature of the universe have been answered. I know what happens when we die. I know how to make a new life. I feel as if I can attract anything. One positive thing to note is that this experience seems to have introduced a couple of new qualities to my character. It seems I'm having less trouble examining myself for fault and doing insight and critical thought about how to improve myself for myself, and my musical ability seems strangely enhanced. A new sense of fractioning harmonies and singing has come to me on both the hand drum and the ukulele. I could probably write this account for decades, but I will stop. I just hope no children ever get their hands on this thing, or if they do, that they are star babies already. That's enough for now. I fall back on my bed. I instantly feel and notice my vision fading rapidly. By fading, I simply mean what I know I should be seeing is no longer what I'm seeing. The first strong feeling I get is a sense of school. It feels like I'm here to learn. I have a teacher. I don't see, hear, or feel the teacher. I simply know I have one. There was at no point a dialogue between me and the teacher, but there was most definitely communication. To simplify the communication, I'll put the communicated feelings into words. At this point, at the very beginning, I am relatively calm. The first major aspect is not mind or thought, but rather feeling. I can feel the fabric of the universe because I am a part of it. This feeling of unity with the universe is both horrifying and tranquil. The horrifying part is that I no longer have any idea what me is. I know what I am. I am I. At no point did I stop existing. Rather, I stopped existing as me. I simply became I. I am. Nothing more, nothing less. I just am. The tranquil part of it is the singular existence. Looking back, it would seem evident to me that this feeling of unity, this indescribable sense of oneness, is what allowed this teacher-student complex to form, along with the non-physical communication. So now the groundwork for the trip has been laid and I am not really feeling anything specific. The only definite identifiable feeling is that of mystery and wonderment. I've never felt, seen or comprehended anything like this. So now I'm a part of this desk, as I will call it. In retrospect, I believe I thought of it to be a desk due to confusing my hand and fingers for pencils in a cup. As part of this desk, it is natural that I am being taught. I don't know exactly what it is, but I am definitely being taught. There was no lesson, nor was anything communicated, but I was being taught. The trip is now really beginning, or at least begins, with my first act of defiance. I believe the teacher, I'll call him or her Sally, was telling me what was happening. Sally was laying down the boundaries of this new reality and letting me know how it is. My mistake was defying Sally. I have no idea what, but Sally told me something and I disagreed. I then went on to prove to Sally that it was not true. Big mistake. My attempt to prove whatever it was not true, failed miserably, and led to disaster. My mind began racing as I attempted to comprehend what just happened. My normal calculated ideas did not work as they were supposed to. I went into a complete panic. I tried grabbing onto any chunk of reality possible. I don't know what there was to grab onto, but I definitely tried. I think this sunk me much further into the trip than if I had remained calm and accepted the learning. The remainder of the entire trip was spent attempting to find reality. I had no idea what I was looking for, but I was goddamned looking. From what fragmented memories I can put together, it seems to me that I tried to prove to Sally that I was not part of the desk. I tried to do this by rolling off of the desk. When I rolled, however, the desk only grew. I just made it longer. I couldn't roll off the desk, because at this point, it became disturbingly clear that I was the desk. This is when what I call the terror sunk in. A terror that I can't possibly put into words. Something so deeply unnerving, there is absolutely no way to express it. I knew the best chance I had at finding reality was to find me. I immediately went to work trying to see, hear, and feel myself. I didn't exactly know what any of that was or meant, but I was doing it. From what I can remember, it seems the main thing I was doing was trying to see myself. I looked at myself, what I thought would be my head or face. I saw some kind of peach blob. I can only guess that what I did see was my arm. But rather than being able to identify it, it just started repeating and tiling in a sort of fractal-like pattern, endlessly and in all directions. This further enhanced the feeling of unity, and that I was a part of all the universe. And at this time, all the universe was this white plastic desk. I was just an extension of the fabric of the universe. I tried to move, I tried to become separate from it, but it just was not possible. No matter how hard I struggled against it, I was part of it, and there was no separating. I tried to defy Sally more, proving that what Sally was teaching me was wrong, and that this is how reality is. Every time I tried to do something to prove Sally wrong, it flung me deeper into the terror. I sunk further and further from the surface of reality. I had to escape. I had to separate from this unified fabric. I had to become me again. I just knew I did. I knew everything would be better if I could just separate. In order to try to make a way out, I had to extend myself. This area of the trip is the fuzziest in my memory, but I just remember a feeling of endless agony as I fought as hard as I could to separate, but to no avail. No matter what I did, separating was just not going to happen. I tried moving and screaming, but nothing would happen as it was supposed to. Three-dimensional space is very interesting on Salvia. I was definitely in three-dimensional space, but I was also at the same time in two-dimensional space. Normal laws of physics are out the window, and none of the normal rules will help. I'm not sure how this part went, but as far as I can tell, chronologically, the next thing that happened was I found my door. I somehow, while tripping, managed to get from lying in my bed to my door. Again, in retrospect, it would seem that the huge white plastic desk that made up the universe was indeed my wall, and the endless agony I experienced of trying to move to no avail was me making my way from one part of the wall to my door. This felt like it took endless amounts of time. Soon, space started becoming slightly more normal. It was all still very wrong, but it was still more normal than before. I opened my door, which just revealed more white plastic. I then found another door out of my own existence and opened it too. I was still very horrified at this point, but the terror seemed to be on diminish, as very slight streams of reality seeped into my Salvia world. I somehow finally managed to open a door that didn't lead to more plastic, and I ended up in a dark room. This room would be the one just outside mine, and at this point, reality is for the most part coming back in full swing. I start to realize I'm at home, but I don't trust myself. After not being able to roll off the desk, not finding reality or a way out, and not being able to open a door out of the world, well, I just didn't trust anything. I couldn't trust this reality. I did not believe it was real. It was a trick. Sally was tricking me. No, this isn't real. None of it was real. I went up the stairs to my kitchen, half expecting the door not to open to anything. I entered the kitchen and looking at my counter and fridge, I got an overwhelming feeling I was being tricked. The corners were too sharp, the smooth surface far too pristine. The glossy finish is far too shiny. This wasn't reality. This was still a different world that I was making, but was not in control of. I open the fridge and take a look inside. The contents are reminiscent of my reality fridge, but I don't trust it. I grab the cream from the fridge and walk to the bathroom down the hall. I remember looking in the mirror, but I have no recollection whatsoever of seeing me. I think at this point, I still don't know what me is. I know I am, and I know I am home, but I don't know who me is. Anyway, I drink down some cream to verify not only that I have a throat that works, believe me, I didn't think I did, but also that the cream is real and not a trick. By the time I leave the bathroom and walk back out into the kitchen, my sobriety is returning and the trip is fading. I put the cream back in the fridge and I started to run over everything that just happened in my head. I would say this is when the trip ended. I realized I was me, and me was I. I was at home, and now in my kitchen somehow. This world is real, and everything is okay. I walk back downstairs and go into my room. My curtains are ripped half off my wall, my bed sheets are torn off my bed, and there is a blanket lying across my wall beside my door. I grab a glass walk to my bathroom and take another swig of water because my throat feels numb, almost non-existent. Very strange feeling. My body does not feel normal and I still have a bit of salvia gravity acting on me. I feel a very negative mood, probably from being in complete terror for what felt like eternity. I pace around my room taking sips of water, but I just feel very bad and negative. I figure music is the best thing to relieve this very negative feeling, so I flip on Yellow Submarine by the Beatles and let it take me away. I just sort of sit in my computer chair looking at my background and listening to the music thinking happy thoughts. I keep listening to the Beatles and distracting myself, and within about 15 minutes I start feeling pretty baseline. I actually had some weed to smoke, but I took it out and just kind of looked at it. I really had no desire whatsoever to have any, so I put it away. I can understand how salvia could be used to help overcome addiction. I really had absolutely no desire to smoke it and almost wanted to get rid of it. I felt like I just didn't want to do any drugs anymore. I was so grateful to be normal again that I didn't ever want to leave baseline. But this feeling went away by the next day. All in all, I would say this trip was at once the most beautiful and most horrifying experience of my life. I suppose most people would call this a bad trip, but once I returned to baseline, I didn't feel that way. I felt very grateful to be at baseline again, and I'm still very grateful for the experience. There is no way in hell I could ever say I regret doing it. I plan to do another high dose of salvia again in the future, but next time maybe with a trip sitter to make sure I don't manage to go from my bed, through a locked door, and up a set of stairs while full-blown tripping. In retrospect, I think I spent probably about 4 or 5 minutes standing flat against, or laying flat against my wall, squirming in terror. After that, I guess I managed to stand up or shuffle to my door, and it took me opening the door 3 or 4 times in my mind before it opened in reality. If I had set up a video camera, I bet it would have been a very hilarious scene. It took me 3 days of constant reflection and several low-dose uses of salvia to recall and piece together this trip entirely. The original trip report I wrote about 30 or 45 minutes after reaching baseline from this trip is nothing like this one. The low doses of salvia helped me better understand the effects of it, how it works, and why it works. This combined with a lot of reflection on the trip gave me great insights into what really happened. As you probably know, this kind of stuff is very difficult to describe, but I did my best. There are several key feelings and events that aren't in this trip report simply because I don't know any way to put them into words. It's clear why salvia is considered the most potent natural hallucinogen. Nonetheless, it is an amazing drug that deserves enormous respect for its powers. Two days ago, I had my first, and likely last, experience with Salvia Divinorum. I'm writing about it here to help me process and understand what happened, as it was one of the most powerful and terrifying experiences of my life. I also want to caution first-time users about dosage. First, I should say that in my younger days, I took a fair amount of LSD, mushrooms, mescaline, and some other hallucinogens. I probably had 50 to 75 trips altogether, and I never once had an unpleasant experience. These days I stick mostly to weed and beer, with the occasional opiate here and there. I've always said I never met a drug I didn't like, although angel dust would probably come closest to receiving that honor. Anyway, I came into possession of some 10x salvia extract and decided to do it on a quiet Sunday. I was careful enough to do this at a time when I had no responsibilities and nothing really stressful going on in my life. I turned off the lights, sat on the bed, and tried to get myself into a peaceful, meditative state. I made 2 big mistakes, however. I for one did this without a sitter, and 2, made a serious dosage error, packing the bowl with about half a gram of 10x extract. This was entirely an accident. I was reading from a dosage chart, and the table I was reading was for non-fortified leaf rather than 10x fortified. So essentially I packed about 5 to 10 times the amount for a normal to strong dose, about 400 milligrams instead of 40. I heated the bowl with an ordinary butane lighter, took as much in my lungs as I could, held it in for 30 seconds, exhaled, and then started taking another pull. Next thing you know, the floor dropped out from under me, literally. It felt like multiple levels of floors falling away from me, and I blacked out. I don't know if I laid back down on the bed or not. When I came to, my body was standing, frozen in the next room, and I was mentally outside my body, hearing myself saying, "What the fuck is this? What the fuck?" Here's the part that's hard to explain. At that moment, it was clear to me that I had never existed, that myself was sort of a cosmic joke, an illusion or random construction, and that there wasn't anything really real there. I heard my name pronounced by a deep voice in an almost mocking tone, almost as if to say, "You really think that life happened?" I had completely lost my sense of identity and had no idea who or where I was. I had the impression of being just molecules or matter or energy in the universe in that room, with no organization or structure, which sounds liberating and eye-opening, but it was quite terrifying. I don't know how long this period of time lasted, but I think it was likely quite brief. Panic kicked in almost immediately. At some level, I was just conscious enough to be very worried that I couldn't go back. I spent the next 10 or 15 minutes fighting the drug, in a psychotic state filled with sheer terror. I know that I ran up and down the stairs twice like a cat who's been spooked. I'm amazed I didn't fall down the stairs, actually. I got on my hands and knees and rolled my head around on the carpet trying to get the stuff out of me. I heard myself saying, "No, no, no," repeatedly, and then later, "I'm sorry, I won't do it again. I learned my lesson." Although I have a feeling that a lot of that probably came out as gibberish. At some point, I took off my shirt and jumped into bed, thinking I could sleep it off. But that made it much worse. It felt like I was trapped, and I immediately broke out in a fever sweat. A little splash of water on my face seemed to help a little. Eventually, I could function again. I kept saying, "That was horrible. That was fucking horrible." In the end, I will say that the experience was incredibly interesting, but also by far the scariest thing I've ever felt. Of course, the dose was too high, especially for a first-time user, but Salvia definitely produces a totally unique effect. I'm not sure how well previous experiences with hallucinogens can really prepare anyone for such a rapid onset of dissociation, combined with the extreme dysphoria felt from an overly strong dose. This is substantiated by my reading up on the chemical activity of KOR agonists, along with viewing many horrific YouTube videos of kids ripping 100x bongs. To complicate things, not only did symptoms come on so quickly, but I didn't seem to know that I was on Salvia, at least not for the first few minutes. I've had out-of-body experiences before, and more than one near-death experience, and none of them were particularly scary. This was a sudden and complete shattering of the self. People sometimes say that you have to be at peace with yourself and be in a good place to undertake this journey, but ironically, I feel like if you have all that, you may be in the worst place because you don't want to leave it behind. I have a lovely wife, 2 great young adult children, a house and a good job. I am an ardent atheist and humanist. I believe in the value of life in the here and now. The perception in my brain that all of that was false, a dream, that it never happened, felt in the moment to be conveyed rather cruelly. People who like to personify the Salvia goddess would say you didn't respect her and she kicked your ass. In this case, that's another way of saying you took too much. Intellectually, I already believe that consciousness and identity are merely constructs, that we are just collections of tissue, electrical signals, stored memories and thoughts, etc. But to experience this reality firsthand didn't really teach me anything new. It just shoved it in my face in a kind of petrifying immersion. After much reflection, I've managed to find some silver linings in this harrowing trip. First, I've gained a renewed appreciation for this life, for my good fortune in the things that I do have and love. Second, I have respect and wonder for the marvel that is human consciousness. It's such a complex, remarkable, and precariously balanced feature of a living organism. At the same time, it can be surprisingly robust. I am amazed that my sense of self was able to reassemble itself after being flattened so forcefully. Finally, I really do have new sympathy for humans who are naturally, incurably, permanently insane, especially schizophrenics. Now when I see a street person muttering nonsense, cursing at nobody in particular, swinging awkwardly at invisible demons, lurching suddenly in random directions, I will be able to say, I went through something like that once, and it's terrible. I do wonder what it would have been like to have taken a more moderate dose, but I think I have to let some time pass before I might consider trying it again. Firstly, let me say that my initial experience with Salvia was very positive. It was a group experience with 1 gram of the approximately 6x fortified leaf, and some liquid extract shared amongst 3 people. In fact, I enjoyed the experience so much that I decided to order some more Salvia 6X extract from the same reliable vendor, 2 grams this time, to learn more about this amazing substance and its entheogenic potential. I was so impressed by its positive effects. I wanted other people I knew and cared about to try it. This was an enormous mistake. I was not prepared for the extreme intensity and variability of experience which the fortified leaf can provide, especially in a heterogeneous social setting. The first time I got the new batch, my Uncle Xander immediately wanted to smoke some, but he was the most strongly affected by the last batch and not entirely affected in a positive way. After that, Uncle Xavier did not want any more, after being merged with the fishing show we were watching on TV, the first time we smoked it together. I think it affected him profoundly, and he chose not to do it again. However, inevitably, Xavier and I found ourselves in a group setting of about 10 people who smoked pot. They were all close, but not nearly as close as we 3 had been the first time we used Salvia together. Everyone was doing bong hits, except for me, because I don't use marijuana, and Xavier asked me to break out the Salvia, since we had not had a chance to smoke the new batch then. He was trying awfully hard to convince people to give it a try, and 2 other people did, including one of my in-laws. Also, Xander and I tried it again, about 1 or 2 tokes apiece. This was enough to produce the familiar hot flashes, sweating, and temporary somatic body buzz feeling, without the full dissociative effects. However, there was a new component to this experience. The people who tried it all reported that, in addition to the effects described which we all experienced, there was a profound feeling of wrongness or embarrassment, like everyone who was not doing it was watching them. My cousin-in-law even said specifically that you feel like everybody is watching you as if you've done something wrong. I know exactly how he felt because my experience had the same component as well in this more heterogeneous social environment where not everyone chose to partake. A few days later, I found myself at the house of 2 of my friends. I say friends, but really, their house is like my house. I consider them family, and I am comfortable crashing in their home from time to time. But they also strike me as somewhat insensitive, self-absorbed, and high-strung at times, and I am always a bit on guard emotionally when I am with them because of that. Doesn't mean we can't be friends, they're just a little different than me. Anyway, they were doing bong hits and offered me one. I declined because I don't smoke pot, but told them about my recent positive Salvia experiences, and that I had some of it with me. I offered it to them, and they declined, but after hearing my description of it, they said they wanted to watch me smoke it once. So I fired up 1 hit, which was just enough to reach a threshold dose to get the hot flash and the sensation of vibrating skin. However, during the experience, it became painfully apparent that these people, especially my buddy's wife, just had absolutely no idea what I was going through. She just kept talking to me like I was smoking your basic homegrown or something, but I was going through a profound experience. I was looking into her eyes, listening to her talk, and I guess I went a little above the threshold because for a minute or 2, I could not respond to her verbally, as if I was a little aphasic, but I had the profound feeling that every word they said was contrived, like a TV commercial script or something, and I found that very annoying. And I got that self-conscious, defensive, embarrassed feeling again. Once I came out of it, I felt as perfectly normal as before I took the hit. I silently resolved not to smoke anymore until I was alone, because of how it made me feel about people in social groups who were not using it. So they eventually went to bed, and I was the only one left awake in the house. I went to their computer desk and sat down. I immediately noticed the really cool fractal computer wallpaper and thought it was pretty. I was so happy to finally be alone, so I could hit this salvia and go a little deeper into the experience. It had been so long, and the last time was so good. This time, I did 1 hit of the extract, with predictable results. I followed it up with a 2nd hit and passed the body buzz phase. After that, I did not have a full-blown dissociative hallucination, but I was looking at the fractal wallpaper, and I noticed that the computer screen seemed to be bowing slightly inward, as if it were a stretchy, concave membrane. When the membrane flexed in, it seemed to crack along the lines of the fractal on the screen, revealing blackness between the cracks. The cracks got bigger as it flexed in, and smaller as it seemed to flex back to its original position, like elastic. I also saw some motion along the edge of the cracks, and I thought I heard what sounded like the din of a crowd, only very, very far away. It sounded like they were saying, "He's in our world now, let's talk to him," and stuff like that, like they wanted to confront me or something. It made me a little uncomfortable that these faint voices were referring to me in the third person, and seemed annoyed. Then, the voices faded, the cracks healed, and I came out of the experience. I waited about 5 minutes, and then decided to go back in. I was familiar with the stages of descent by now. The first hit produces a sense of hotness or elevated body temperature, sometimes with actual sweat. The second hit causes a distinct and very powerful somatic body sensation of my skin vibrating all over, as if being massaged by an electric percussion massager. After that, visual patterns occur, which for me usually involve bricks, cracks, and plasma surrounding things. After the second hit, I began to see the same hallucination I saw before, the stretchy membrane cracking along the fractal lines of the computer screen, the activity at the edges of the cracks, and the din of the distant crowd. Then I decided to take the third hit. Upon taking the third hit, the cracks, in reality, grew much wider, several inches, and growing. I began to feel sucked uncontrollably toward the growing blackness between the cracks. I cannot tell you why, but I was in abject terror of the blackness between the cracks and had the overwhelming feeling that if I were to touch it, I would die. I looked away from the computer screen and then realized something frightening. It wasn't just the screen that was cracking and fissuring, it was reality. Reality was concave and being stretched at the weak points, usually at the borders and edges of objects in the visual field, beyond the breaking point, and I was being sucked through the void that was left. I kicked. I screamed inside, but nothing would come out. I fought not to fall in, but it was useless. I was slipping further and further, and the voices were getting louder and louder. As I fell closer, I began to see that the activity I was witnessing at the edges of the cracks was, in actuality, the motion of what looked like strings of paper dolls, connected at the hands, lining the boundary between reality and the blackness. And they were looking to the person on their left and saying something, and then looking to the person on their right and saying something. They were saying different things to each other, like, "Here he comes. He's in our world now. Now we have him," or "Don't let him get away." It was the din of a crowd getting louder, and I was careening toward them into the blackness. By this time, I was in abject terror. The experience was so real and overwhelming that I was completely in the moment and had no memory of having just taken a drug, even though I knew who I was, and my identity as I was intact. As I fell further and further, what originally looked like paper dolls at a distance now actually had colour and shape. As they got bigger and bigger, they began to look like, and I know this sounds crazy, people. Little plastic Mexican Fisher-Price type people, only they were malevolent. Some wore hats or ponchos, and they all had very circular heads, and their hands were connected, with cylindrical bodies and no legs or feet. And they were moving their heads back and forth and talking to each other, and they wanted to hurt me, to trap me there, and never let me get back. Then, right before I fell through, the falling stopped, and one little Mexican Fisher-Price man with a poncho and sombrero zoomed out of the chain of weeble-looking people where he was and put his face directly in mine, nose to nose. His arms were stretched, so he was still holding onto his neighbours, but we were eye to eye and face to face, and he looked directly into my face with a mean look and said, "What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here." I had no response. I tried to talk, but I couldn't. Then, the concave field of vision started to flatten, the black fissures started to close, and I started to recede from the fissures. The little plastic Mexican man got sucked back into his line where he was, although he was the one fighting unsuccessfully to stay where he was, and the line of people began to grow smaller and smaller as I receded further and further away from the cracks in reality, and the cracks began to heal. The din of the crowd eventually died to a whisper, and then nothing at all as the cracks closed. The fissures healed together to present the familiar scenery, and the blackness was hidden once more. The next day, I gave the remaining 1.5 grams to Xander and told him what happened. He laughed at me, made fun of me and said I should have known it was all in my head. In actuality, I knew it was not real and all in my head. In retrospect, I could see clearly that the mumblings of the crowd were likely my own superego, warning me against the potentially damaging consequences in the recreational use of such a powerful psychedelic. Looking back, I knew in my rational mind that the blackness probably represented my unconscious, which remains hidden from the conscious mind for good reason, because that's the way the brain is meant to work. But I also remember how real it seemed. I remember the entities and how unnervingly ego-dystonic they were. It felt like they were really external entities who wanted to hurt me, and I was powerless to stop them. It felt like they were not me and not part of my mind's own creation while I was under. And that was the last time I did Salvia Divinorum. Now, it's been over a year since this happened. I might not be opposed to trying it again someday, but my advice to others contemplating this journey is, be careful. Even if you expect a good experience, you never know what you're going to get. God bless.